The podcast that floats down here.
Hi, I'm Melissa, your Stephen King veteran.
Hi, I'm Ben, the Stephen King and horror film fanboy.
And hello, I'm Luke, your first-time Stephen King reader.
Hi, and welcome. It's the podcast that floats down here. I am Melissa, and we are here discussing the book Pet Sematary by Stephen King. This book was published on November 14th, 1983. It is 373 pages long, although my copy is 562, so I don't know where I got that number from. This is almost 600 pages in my hand. The dedication for this book was for Kirby McCauley. I am joined by a wonderful panel of readers. We're going to start with Ben. Hi, Ben. How are you?
Good evening. I'm well. Here.
Also with me is, as always, Luke. Otherwise, I would be able to click the buttons.
Hi there. Nice to be back. This is a fun book.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting take. Okay. And tonight, our special guest for the evening is Dog. Hello. Welcome to our show.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks for having me, guys. And yeah, great to be back here again. I was a guest, I don't know, maybe about a year ago or so for a Game of Thrones chat. But yeah, really looking forward to talking about Pet Sematary with you folks. One of my favorite Stephen King novels. Actually, one of my favorite novels of all time. Who am I kidding here? So, but yeah, great to be here. Really looking forward to talking with you guys about the novel. So thanks for having me.
We are typically joined for our Stephen King book club from Abby Gertie from House Condescension. She is, however, in the process of moving cross country and is not available because she's living out of a truck. So hopefully she'll be back next month, possibly even live in state at least. We'll see. But in the meanwhile, she says hello and she's not talking to all of you. Okay, because she can't. This book, the back cover says, sometimes dead is better. When the Creeds moved into a beautiful old house in rural Maine, it all seemed too good to be true. Physician father, beautiful wife, charming little daughter, adorable infant son, and now an idyllic home. As a family, they've got it all, right down to the friendly cat. But the nearby woods hide a blood-chilling truth, more terrifying than death itself, and hideously more powerful. Pet Sematary. All right. We're going to start us off. So this part, we start off just sort of three big thoughts. You each get up to three, less than three if you want. What are your big takeaways? What stood out to you? What's your thought? Open it up. Go for it, Benj.
So I might kind of start right from the beginning. As different from other King books as we've covered so far, there's no terrible parenting in this story. Like, there's some bad choices because, like, PTSD on Rachel's part, because of her history and everything. There's some bad choices on Rachel's father's part. But in general, not bad parenting at all, which was interesting to see from a Stephen King novel. Just to this point, at least, it was interesting because, it's one of those, like, and there wasn't a character that because typically there's one character where I'm like, just fuck that guy. There really wasn't in this book. Like, there was a couple that annoyed you. They kind of like, yeah, I want to see that guy punched in the mouth once, but it's not like, they're the worst people ever. And so it's nice to go into the full on supernatural realm, and it's a humanic story, but like the crux of it is not human based, if that makes sense. There is an actual mystical thing being done, which again is a bit different than what we've seen.
I will say I liked that part. I liked that there was parenting and co-parenting and healthy adult relationships. Just me.
Yeah, I thought it was maybe the most realistic to everyone's, like, normal, I guess normal's not a really good term to use, but more average lifestyles, right? There's nothing supremely different about this family, right? They're just going out there. Mistakes are made, but they're just straightforward, by the book people for the most part. They have disagreements. They work through them. And, there's still tension between them in certain relationships, but that's just how life goes sometimes, and you have to work through that together. And I disagree with your idea on this form of parenting, or this idea that we have to work through, or but we still have to do this as a unit. I think it's a pretty different story, definitely, like Benji said, from what we've seen in what this is the sixth King book that our group here has talked about. Very different.
Yeah, I think great points everybody made there, and I'd just like to say, this family's, they're likable characters, right? I'm thinking of an example of where I think it's right when we first pull in, Gage gets stung by the bee, but Ellie was, she falls off the swing kind of thing, right? But in the background, in Lewis's mind, he's like, oh my gosh, she's screaming like it's just, the end of the world. And who hasn't seen like a little kid or toddler or something like that, kind of, wanting, that kind of attention like that. It was just kind of like an everyday thing that really drew you into these characters. And that's why it's just so, I guess we'll get into that when I share my thoughts there too. But I think just overall, these are likable characters. Just they're not the cleavers by any means, but they're just likable characters.
I wonder if that's, for me, my biggest takeaway, honestly, in this book is that it's really hard. It was hard to force myself to the end of the book. It has been decades since I've read this book. It's not one of my go-tos when I just want to pick up a book and read, because I remember being so, like, it just didn't sit well with me. And I couldn't remember why. I knew bad things happened, but I couldn't remember what it was. And as I was plugging along, I was half reading it and half listening to it and switching back and forth. And at one point I was like, I have to stop listening to the audiobook because I need to be in control of when I can like stop and pause and find out what's going. And I think it's because the characters are so relatable. They have faults, they have fears. They're just normal humans. It makes them easier to relate to. That could be me. That could be me and my husband and our kids. That could be our road right outside my house. And yes, the supernatural element, like, that makes it a little less likely, but all the rest of it, that could just happen. So it's really disturbing to me when you like start thinking that could be my life. And so that makes it harder because I don't want it to be my life. And so I don't really want to know how it ends because I know Stephen King.
Right. Yeah. So I'll kind of jump to something really quick. My first introduction to this was the movie. This was actually my second Stephen King movie I ever saw. I was probably 9 years old.
I don't think this one was my fault.
No, this was not your fault. This was a friend down the street from where we grew up, him and his older sister. But this was one we would watch over and over again. And so the differences, and I know we're not movie discussion, but the differences we'll talk about later. It's one thing that throws me when I go back and read this, because this is this was the second Stephen King book that I ever read. And so the differences aren't drastic, but there's slight changes. And it's like, oh shit. And so now when I'm reading, there's stuff that I can't remember. Is that book or is that movie? And it really just screws with me a lot of times on the way through.
Right. Yeah. For the adaptation, they really, especially a lot of the conversations, it might be like where Ellie's talking to Lewis and, they're talking about death and dying, and it might have been over like Missy's death in the film or something like that, or, but it was really over Norma's death in the book. But just real, if I could, we wrote down our thoughts and stuff, and like my biggest thought, coming out of this was, and Melissa was, bringing that to our attention anyway, was grief, right? Because it was just like, out of all these characters that you just love and are very likable, and you're kind of drawn into, the grief that you're going to go through, by the end of this book is just, and the grief that our characters go through too. But I think the main theme of the book overall is grief, what grief will do to folks. It'll, mess with their sanity, even, things of that nature. It just totally kind of takes away your free will. Even to the point of, where, we lose the cat. And, I remember when you're reading about that, where, Lewis is going through, maybe it's not church, maybe it is, it's, he's only like 90% sure that, maybe it's not that cat, but when he finally sees, the cat, and he's like, he realized that he loved church, right? And then kind of like, as a reader, you're just kind of like, oh man, and, but that's just going to go through, more and more and more, especially what we see with Judd, going through it at first too. I wept a couple times through this book. So
I completely agree that, the main theme is, kind of along the lines of grief and pain and death and even denial of that. It's the lack of believability in some of these big real life things, right? And one of the big first argument that we have between Lewis and his wife are about Ellie being told about death, right? And that, hey, eventually your cat's going to die. And she starts freaking out, and like a kid does. If it's your first experience with something like that, it can be difficult to handle. And so, and I don't know what Melissa's questions are, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a question similar to, hey, what are your guys' thoughts on telling children about those things? I tend to fall under more of Lewis's style of honesty is always the best policy. You don't need to sugarcoat it. You don't need to give them a bloodbath description, but I think being realistic about that sets the tone for making it a healthier relationship with death moving forward, because it's inevitable. It's going to happen to people around you. It's going to happen to people you know, people you don't know. It's going to happen to you someday. So I think it's healthy to get that at least in a small child's head to start grappling with at some point.
2 points. Number one, Melissa does not have a question about that, so thanks for bringing that up. I do have questions, though, so I won't steal that one. Two, I tend to have a similar parenting style. I'm an oversharing parent. I'd rather tell you too much because I want you to hear it from me to the point where you cannot possibly want to ask anybody else about it. So I will tell you. I will tell you what I know. I can tell you what I believe. I can tell you what other people believe. I can tell you, like, yes, that's going to happen. My son, when he gets really mad, he's like, well, fine, but you're just going to die anyway. And I'm always like, yeah, I am eventually. He's like, no, you're not supposed to die. Like, which throws him off, which is funny, but hopefully not soon. But yeah, like, I'd rather just be upfront, matter of fact, developmentally appropriate, but
Yeah.
Knowing is better than not knowing and creating your own imaginative answer.
Yeah. I mean, I personally, I think the earlier, the better. It eases them into it. Like, I was lucky enough when I was like 3 or 4, we lost our dog Daffy. I got introduced to death very quickly because I loved that damn dog. Got introduced real early on, knew what it was. It sucked, but, so that's kind of, my feeling is about that time is where you kind of start introducing it. Like right now with my son, he's been watching dinosaurs eat people on Jurassic Park Evolution World. It's like, they're dead. Oh, they died. It's kind of funny, so he gets it to a point.
All right. Anybody want to jump to another thought? Anybody have one that's kind of burning to get out to the group?
I guess kind of right along with that, we have some very prominent characters that die, and they're not necessarily big characters that we know of, but they become big in how they interact with the story and everything moving forward. The biggest one, it's the day that starts the whole nightmare in Lewis's opinion, is when Victor Pascal, the jogger, gets essentially cut in half by a truck, right? And his head's cracked open, and he is brutally dying. And this is Lewis's first day at the office, or like the first day with kids back at school or something. And like, wow, that's, even for a doctor, who's been doing his thing for a long time, that affected him, right? And there's that helplessness that he knew no matter where this kid was brought to. He could have been brought to the best surgeon in the world. You're not saving him. And the fact that you still have to kind of do your best, and so that you can look in that, kid's parents' face and say, I tried. It was a losing battle from second one, but we made every effort that we could. And I think that really, starts a lot of mental balls rolling in Lewis, which makes the church death a little bit later that much more difficult. And then Norma down the road, and also we'll eventually get to Gage. But so I think any of those that you guys connect most with or find the most interesting for how it plays out in the story, I'd say go for it.
Well, I'll start with Pascal. One interesting thing that I liked about his backstory is he had a connection to the Micmacs. Like he's a descendant of them, and so it was inference that there's some connection to Pascal and the Micmacs.
I thought Lewis done like his research, and he didn't even come from the area. He was from like
He was
outside of the area. It had nothing to do with it.
I forget where I'm hearing them because I remember because I was doing a little studying on it, and I'm like later on.
I think the inference is just that like his skin was like really super tan or something like that, and I'm not sure if King was kind of.
Okay.
I don't know if he was necessarily going for, is he a descendant necessarily of the Micmacs or anything like that, but I think one could possibly infer that just by his description of his skin, maybe, but
Gotcha.
I can't, I can't say 100% for sure though.
And it's definitely not something Lewis ever knew, because as far as he could find out, the kid was not from the area even remotely.
Okay.
So
fair enough. So
He grew up in New Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah, he was trying to figure out. He was thinking he was a crazy man just for calling the mortician and things of that nature. And just it's like, why are you investigating all this, right? So I think that's when he like hung the phone up or something. Or
fair. That was one part, kind of. I guess.
I think in Lewis's head, he was questioning if there was a connection because of the pretty sinister quote that Victor leaves Lewis with.
Yeah, how does he know about that, right? Because he mentioned, and they don't show that, and I know you guys didn't want to talk about the film, but they don't show that in the film, but he says the words "pet cemetery," if I recall. There's like and gah, and then the soil of a man's heart is stonier. I believe that quote, gets, so Lewis is kind of thinking, hey, how do you know about this, right? And just real quickly, I think that was Lewis is always getting warned, right? He's about something, right? And this was his first warning, because this is even prior to Judd with church and things of that nature. But I mean, it's just like he constantly gets warned, don't do this, And I think that's kind of my biggest take of the Pascal character, is like he was kind of Lewis's first warning, really, because he's going to get a lot of them throughout, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, and I think it's a pretty reasonable jump to think that Pascal had some connection, because he came back from the dead, sort of in vision form, at least once to Lewis, like this.
Yes,
okay?
The very first night.
And Ellie was dreaming about him. By the end of the book, he was talking to Ellie over and over and over again, which is like a whole nother thing with her, like, in how is she connected to all of this. But so it's reasonable to think he's somehow related, or is it just that the spirits of the cemetery grabbed the closest dead thing that interacted with these people to try and get them away? It's or opposite, because he was really warning them against it.
Yeah,
that's what makes me think that he is definitely a descendant of some sort.
Because he's the one that shows up and tells Lewis, like, he takes him up to the pet cemetery in the vision, quote unquote, in the night, and he tells him, don't go over the deadfall, do not go past this point, kind of thing. And that's where it really kind of kicks up, because Lewis wakes up the next morning and his feet are muddy. The hell, So how much of a vision was that? We can move on to Church. Not much to say about him. He was a good cat. He seemed like a decent cat. Even after Resurrection, he seemed like a decent. He was just odd, but
I think with Church, if I may, is that they have him neutered, because Judd had basically kind of suggested that to Lewis about having him neutered or spayed or whatever the heck they do, right? Have him fixed, right, so he doesn't wander. But it's pretty much said that Church, he hangs out by the radiator, goes to his dish, and he sleeps with Ellie, and that's like his day. That's all he ever does. So for him to even head towards Judd's, I think that's where that mystical power comes in, because prior to that, we have where Lewis saves Norma's life, right, and then now Judd feels compelled to share the power, if you will, right, or kind of return the favor when he loses Church, right? So but I kind of think it's kind of like that when the Wendigo's power, whatever the power was happening there. As soon as there's a line in there about where when Lewis finally says, "Okay, if you can ever do me a favor, let's do it." Right. And then I think like the next section is our Thanksgiving, after Thanksgiving morning, and Lewis is taking a little nap, and then Judd calls him about Church, right? So it's almost like that power had kind of pushed Church along to get the story rolling, if you will. And and that's our first moment of grief, if you will. And then of course it's just gonna spiral into the madness.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to point out how often things are foreshadowed. Like there's an impending dread on almost every bad thing that happens, right? It's almost like, oh, I really hope my cat doesn't die. I really hope my cat doesn't die. Guess what? The first chance it has to happen, the cat gets run over by a truck. Like that happens, and the same things continue to happen. Like, oh man, when Lewis goes out there to look at the cat, he almost gets hit by the Orenco truck. He almost gets hit by it, and he's like, oh man, that would be really bad. Guess who gets hit by an Orenco truck later on in the story? His son. Mm-hmm. And there's even times where he's like, man, we got to be careful about, the kids running into the street, and, it wouldn't take much for Gage to run into the street. And there's just so many of those impending dreads throughout this that it's like, you're wishing for these things to happen. Like the Sematary, I think, is listening to you. Like the worst thing that you could have, ask for, it's encouraging that to happen. There's a lot of it that feels like it's on wheels, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. That it seems like a lot of this is preordained, what ends up happening. But the fact that it's kind of foreshadowed, and most of them, if not all of them, seem to be carried out, I find really, really fascinating, because that even if you know something's going to happen, not knowing when it's going to happen can make it feel even worse, because it's constantly in your head spinning through. And I think that's just the tone that's set from very early on, right? And even when Lewis is like, oh man, I don't think we should be here. We should just move down to Orlando. I'll work at Disney World and, all that stuff. And it's like, probably should have done that.
All right. I want to talk about Judd.
I'd love to talk about Judd myself.
Go for it. I noticed you had a note, and I have some tendencies and leanings about Judd myself, so I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on him.
Okay. Well, I think out of all the Stephen King, there's been a lot of, like, I guess I'll put Judd in the side character category, and he's made quite a few powerful ones, but he's the one that stands out to me the most. He's probably one of my favorite characters in a Stephen King novel, and it's just great because, like, at first Lewis he's a doctor, and he's trepid about even kind of meeting Judd and Norma, just because he's like, oh, the next thing you know, they're gonna want him to examine them and stuff like that. They got this ailing them and all that kind of stuff, right? But eventually, Judd basically becomes the father figure that he should have had, because he didn't know his father. I think he might have known his father at 3 or something, maybe.
Right. Or he had the mortician uncle was more of a father figure because his dad died when he was so young.
Absolutely. But I think that, and it's Star Wars Day, gang. So may the 4th be with you. So, and I'll just tell you, I think Judd he's kind of our Obi-Wan, if you will.
Oh yeah.
Story, right. He's our world builder, right? He's like the guy that I just want to sit down and have a few beers with Judd, and I don't do that anymore, but I would, in fantasy world or whatever, I'd love to sit down and just have him, tell me about all the folklore, So a lot of times in the scenes, there might be a character in there that's yawning or something, right, or something, but I'm just still like, oh man, just let him speak, just let him keep going. I want more of the world to keep building with him and that. So, but yeah, I think the most heartbreaking moment with him was when his wife had passed, and Lewis came over to comfort him or whatever, and he just broke down crying, and yeah, I did too. I have to admit. So, because he was just like such a likable character. You just hated for him to go through this, and but yeah, he's the Obi-Wan character. I think I covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about, to begin with Judd anyway. So, Melissa.
Here's my thing with Judd. I wish it wasn't him who had shown the Pet Sematary. That's his character flaw. Because you're right. He's fantastic. He's the Obi-Wan, and he's the Gandalf leading them on a journey quest, and the guy you sit down and smoke your pipe weed with and whatever. But that character doesn't always have the fatal flaw to show you the dark side, right? They protect you from it. And so I had a hard time, I guess, justifying in my brain, why is Judd doing this when he is such a good, kind soul? And I think it wasn't until we found out about the other human who had been brought back.
Timmy Baderman.
Timmy.
Yeah, it's just a compulsion. It almost like an addiction to, we have to keep trying. You have to know. I don't know.
So to your point, Melissa, you made me think of it, and Luke, I hope I'm not jumping on your toes. You look like you had a similar thought, but it's the Dumbledore. He cared too much about Lewis. He cared too much about Ellie to let her suffer the pain of the cat dying. Now, yes, it is the addiction of, because he even says later on, it has to be known. I'm the old guy. I'm the only one left that knew about this. So I had to pass on the information because it's just something, and that is the fatal flaw. But for every good character, you need some sort of fatal flaw. You can't be all good all the time, And so, like I said, with like Dumbledore's problem was he cared too much and he wasn't willing to give Harry the truth. Same as Judd, except opposite. He wanted to give the truth because he cared too much about Ellie and Lewis and the family. So I think that's the. Go ahead, Luke.
I look at Judd as being the opposite of a Derry old timer, right? We talked about the old timers around Derry so much, and why are they completely ignoring the reality of their town, right? They're completely,
because they know about it.
That's what I'm saying. Like, he does it the exact opposite way, though. He knows about this potentially terrible thing or magical essence of what's going on and shares that knowledge, right? And so he's quite literally a foil to what we see in Derry in a book that's written 2 years later than this. But there's, again, similarities between that type, that style of character, just in a reverse capacity. But I think there's more than just a fatal flaw here. I don't think it's him actively choosing to. I think a lot of what we see isn't people having a chance to choose. I think free will is stripped from a lot of these characters, especially Lewis. And I think in those moments, especially Judd, he knows that he shouldn't do this. And he continuously tells himself, I shouldn't be doing this. But he gets put on tracks. He gets railroaded by the Sematary, in my opinion, and no longer has that free will when it comes down to, saving a life or not. The Sematary decides, this is what we do. You are doing this because you're the conduit that can make it happen. And I'll just go on with the rest of my thought with that. Whenever we see Lewis going through and actually exhuming his dead son's body, he has ample opportunity. He has over and over and over again mental, reservations that I shouldn't do this. I can just leave the grave digging, step over the fence, get back in the car and leave. I can, even when, before he actually cracks open the coffin, he can be like, okay, well, I can just not do it and leave it. Even when he opens the coffin, I can just leave the body here. It's probably going to fall apart because it was so mangled. And he continuously has the right idea of don't do this. And he's a pretty well-educated guy, right? But something is driving him forward. And yeah, maybe it's the grief and the loss that it just emotionally overcomes his mental state. But I just feel like between that, Judd, and when Steve, the guy that comes in at the very end,
Masterson, I think it is.
Steve Masterson, he gets put on those same rails. He almost is convinced to go and help Lewis. This is obviously at the very end, try it again with Rachel. And it's
a fresher option. Continue.
Yeah, it just seems like none of these people, once they're in that fever pitch of this is something that's going to happen, have any chance to pull themselves out of it. And I see Chrissy mentioning it's almost like an addiction. And I think that there is something to that, at least portraying that mentality. So that's something that I noticed throughout, which was why I brought up the foreshadowing consistently on, because I think some of that is ingrained from the Sematary throughout the whole story.
It could also be a slight God complex too. Hey, I brought this person back to life, or I brought this animal back to life, and that adds to the compulsion aspect of, making you think I have the power to do this, so I must do this.
And I wonder, if we were talking about Jack Torrance, I think it would be. But Lewis and Judd don't strike me as that type of person. Does that make sense? I think it could absolutely go to the head of a Jack Torrance, but I think these guys, or it's not intentionally that. I don't know. I see your thought, and I think there are some people who would, but I don't see Judd like that at all. He's just such genuinely a good old country boy, like open arms, Uncle Jim type, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense for him to do it. And I because I'm like half and half on this, because I'm like, yeah, I think it's some of it's that God complex, but a little bit I think it's like, if we look at like something like Harry Potter, where like the defense against the dark arts job is cursed, right, or something, right, or so like there's every year somebody has to switch out or something like that, right?
Exactly.
So I almost think that like once you have the knowledge of this place, there's some sort of jinx, curse, whatever you call it, on this person, that they are going to pass it on when there's an opportunity that comes along, right? So now let's say, church comes along. I talked about this just a little earlier, where as soon as Lewis had said, okay, sometime when you can do me that a favor, I'll let you do it. And then, church dies, and it's almost like that curse or that jinx or whatever it is now in action now, right?
Mhm.
And now Judd is forced, sort of, not necessarily against, and that's where we're kind of like, is it the God complex? Is it just Stephen King saying, hey, this character's screwed right now, and he's gonna pass along the power to Lewis. And I think it's really symbolic. I don't know if you folks caught this, or maybe I'm kind of crazy on this too, but I think it's like when you notice when they're actually walking to the grave, Judd has the pick, right? It's like he's the guy that does the picking, right? He picked out the new guy to pass the power to, and then Lewis has the shovel, right? So I don't know. I just kind of found that kind of interesting about him having the pick and Lewis having the shovel. But and Luke, you brought that out. That's totally what I was thinking there at the end. Cause I'm going, okay, this curse is passed on from folks like Stanny B to Judd, Judd now to Lewis. There's other folks that know it too, of course, but it's Steve. I think it's Steve Masterson there at the end, where Lewis has gone absolutely crazy now, but there's, for some reason, that he doesn't agree to keep moving forward, and he just stays the hell out of Ludlow, and and he doesn't even want to talk about it ever again, right? But that was
He moves to
he was
St.
like
Louis.
the one guy that escaped the curse, sort of thing, but he never returned to Ludlow, they said. So I know I rambled a bit there, folks, but
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
Oh no, you're good.
I'm almost wondering, we're talking about addiction, we're talking about the pullet. This is not any addiction. This is gambling.
Yeah,
That's what this is, right? They gambled. Judd gambled with his dog. He came out
That was
pretty
odd.
even, right? Like a give and take. They gambled with Tim, one guy.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't work at all.
It was
They
like
gambled with
weeks, and he was shipped over from Europe in the war. Like that was just like way,
So, like,
way long time. Yeah.
They gambled with Church, worked out. They gambled with Gage. That was less than successful.
Gamble with the bull,
Right?
Harambe or
Hanratty,
Harambe.
right?
Hammurabi.
Yeah.
Hammurabi. Thank you.
So I don't know. Because once you do it once and it's kind of working for you, or you come out at a loss like you did with Gage, like you want to try again to break even.
It's a scientific
Yeah.
process, right? What could I do slightly differently to up my odds? Is it odds, or is it literally a skill? That's
Is there
kind
a
of
probability factor?
right.
Is it time? That's what Lewis was going with. Like
Right.
the amount of time between death and burial, like ancient ritual burial, does that contribute to the process? See, like this is not just a random addiction. This is like a mathematical gambling type of logical, only faulty logic, but logical, like I know I can get this right if I just have the right set of circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, yeah, and that's what I love about this novel too, is that because it gives you, as the reader, just this little false hope as we hear Lewis's ideas of the analyzing this and that. If I could have just done this better, if I could have done it this way. Oh, they didn't do it this way, so it's it's gonna and it's just it really gives you that, even by the end when you just know it's not even going to work for Rachel, right? There's still even that little bit of false hope that maybe it worked this time. And
And speaking of but speaking of false hope, that kind of goes right into my next note. Section 40. Now, Luke, you're the only one that was new to this entirely. Did you, in the first paragraph and a half or two, did you take the bait? Did you think?
Hold on. But none of these things happened. All of them. The droning Orinco truck, the fingers that just touched the back of Gage's jumper and then slid off. Rachel preparing to go to the viewing in her housecoat. Ellie carrying Gage's picture and putting it on the chair next to her bed. Blah, 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 blah. It goes on. This is the part where Lewis put on a final burst of speed and leaped, throwing himself out straight and parallel to the ground like a football player about to make a tackle. He could see his shadow tracking along the grass. Blah, blah, blah. Lewis's fingers brushed the back of his jacket and then snagged it. He yanked Gage backwards and landed on the ground. On and on and on. And Gage went to grammar school, and at the age of 7, he began going to camp, where he showed a wonderful and surprising aptitude for swimming.
Yeah.
On and on and on.
Yeah. And so, like, my main question to that, because honestly, rereading this, because in one of the adaptations, they do play with that trope or play with that a bit. I can't remember exactly which one. And so, reading this, and when I got to this part again, and I'm like, wait a second, am I wrong about the ending of this? Because I know I've read this before. Am I wrong about this? And then it goes on to the full life. Okay, I'm like, okay, fine. But in those first 2 paragraphs, it made me like second guess myself. I was just wondering your thoughts if that even stood out to you.
You're asking if I caught on to the false future thing?
Or if you believed it.
Not at all. I mean, I don't remember the exact context leading up to that, but there was something definitive before that solidified to me. I don't remember exactly what it was. I didn't get that far into my reread this morning, but to me, it was without a doubt not true. It was in Lewis's head, mentally wishing that was going to be the truth, and the way he was already pretty scatterbrained on certain things and wishful thinking on other things. This just felt like, oh, and if we moved down to Orlando, we could have this life. And I think it's right along those lines that I knew instantly that not a chance that that's happening. That is not the way this book is going.
And I was like 99%, but I'm like, did I forget? Like, it just honestly made me like question myself just from seeing everything else. But because the context really was the night, because the last chapter was he was getting drunk after the wake, but before the day before the funeral. So this is the night before the funeral where he sat and drank like half a case of beer, or like full case of beer to himself.
It was clearly a dream, right? We pretty much knew that.
Yeah, like, because it goes from that section to, and then none of that happened, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, that's what I just wonder if it ever wants to give anybody pause.
Well, I loved, he does this a lot. That's why, especially in this book, I don't know if folks noticed a lot, but like he'll, like something so harrowing or just terrible happen, or we might, be told that, hey, this is going to happen, it's going to be terrible, but he'll start branching off in like another little story, like, oh, wow, Gage made it. He became Olympic swimmer, right? And all this stuff. And he had a wife
Catholic girlfriend,
Rachel didn't like. And then we hear about how he had caught him and he fell down and hurt himself. And there's like a little joke in there. He'll like even bring you back to like humor a little bit, right? Where he tells Rachel, well, I think I'm sterile now, honey, or something like that, right? Where he, about the jockstrap thing, right? So, but then right after that, right, we hear about Gage is talking about like when he was going, I think, up to the stand or something. He's like, well, let's cap this off, right? And that's some dark Stephen King, let's cap this off because the cap is filled with blood, right? So, and then, so he's like, and then, but it's just a beautiful rendition of what a person would go through, a person goes through with grief. The what ifs, right? The what ifs and the just it didn't happen. The denial of what occurred, right? And then the what ifs, of course, and then just the madness that would go with something like that of losing a little one like that. So, but yeah, those are just some powerful rough, right? Just to get through as a reader, because and just the play with he'll play with your emotions there, right? It's like terrible things are happening. Let's go off in this little story, put a little, pepper it with a little humor, and then hit them hard.
And realism, right? Rachel didn't like the girlfriend, and he got hurt. And you don't imagine those negative things. Anything you imagine, anything you dream about, you're going to be the happy, positive. It's all. So the fact that Stephen King peppers in little bits of reality and pepper in this pretty land of salt, right? Sprinkles of negativity makes you feel like it's real.
Absolutely. It certainly allows you to suspend, belief in it a little bit, and it just gives a little bit more depth. That it's easy to err on the side of believability with that, and I think it's pretty well done. Like you said, he does it pretty consistently, and it's one of those things that good writers do that. It's one of those things, it's like an intangible thing. You don't realize it until you've already read it twice, and you're like, that was one of the things that makes this good. That was one of them. I didn't realize it.
All right. Last chance. I think we've got one or two more thoughts. And then I
Oh,
get to move
man.
on to my question.
Go ahead. I'll let you.
Oh,
go
sure. Just real quickly, I know we were talking about our favorite moments, and I think I mentioned to you guys I had read this book probably when I was about 15.
Mhm.
I'd read it a few times, but like my favorite, it was like one of the scariest moments I had read in a book was section 27. It's like page 170 on whatever PDF I'm using here, but it's where Lewis, I believe he just Church was just resurrected. He goes over there, has a few beers with Judd, and Judd tells him the story, how the pet cemetery works and all that stuff. And it was right after, I think, when he asked him about, hey, did anybody ever put a human up there? And he's like, Christ on his throne, no, but basically Lewis comes back and he's in the garage, and it just reminded me of, hey, being in the dark and you don't know where the heck shit is, and but at the same time he has this creepy thing that he doesn't know how creepy it is, or and he's just the whole time he's going, where the hell is this cat at? And then again, just how he talked about just a little bit earlier, he kind of goes off on another tangent a little bit, right? And then he brings you right back into what's going on, and the next thing you know, this cat's curled up around his ankle and leg, kind of going back to where they would talk about what you bought, you owned, and what you owned usually had a way of coming back to you, right? And this thing is, he said, they said it was curled up around him like a snake, and then he just started screaming, right? And they were just like, he was screaming. So I always love that scene. Just because of the creepiness at first, but now when I look back on it now, it was such a metaphor for what was about to happen moving forward. And I think, after I did a little research on this, because I know this was, I think Stephen King said this was kind of his retelling of a short story called The Monkey's Paw. And there's a kind of a scene in The Monkey's Paw where the monkey's paw basically curls around the lady's hand, kind of like a snake too. So I was thinking it was almost like his salute to that book as well. And the only other real quick thing, one of my favorite is the very beginning of part 2. His writing about the horrors, that the human mind can take, and things of that nature. Because we just learned about what's going to happen to Gage, basically, right? And then he kind of leads into part 2, and the first paragraph is just amazing.
Yeah, no, I agree. So you did have one other note here that I was going to touch on as well with you, but we're going to mention Zelda. And the Zelda storyline, especially for the movie watchers, is one that everybody remembers the Zelda storyline on that. Book-wise, it's done very well. A lot of people want to put blame on the parents because they left Rachel. She was, 7 or 8 with Zelda, who was a 10 or 11 at the time, for just an evening. We've all kind of been there as parents, just like, okay, you know what? You're old enough, you know how to take care of your sister. Just do whatever. We have to get the hell out of the house because she's driving us nuts too, and this and that. And
keep in mind, this was also in the 1950s and 60s when
yes.
it was like it was a lot. It was a very different time with leaving kids too. So I always try to remember that.
Yeah, and Zelda, she's made up to, like, from Rachel's point of view, and I get it. She's an evil character, quote unquote. From Rachel's point of view, because she's like, she would laugh, she would, piss herself after she refused the bedpan. She'd laugh and all, but really, it's just with that situation. She's one of the more sympathetic characters in the book because there's no control over it. Yeah, if you're stuck in that situation, yeah, you're probably going to become an asshole. It's unfortunate, but I always did dig that storyline as well.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And the book Zelda is totally different than. I mean, yeah, she's creepy as heck at the end of it, of course, but but the way that her backstory, all that stuff is introduced, and I felt really sad for Zelda and Rachel as well, right? But they said, I think Rachel was only 8 or 11, maybe. Was that correct, guys?
Yeah.
Do you guys remember? Like 8
I
years
believe
old?
like 8 or 9. Like,
And I'm looking back at what King would do. He's going to find the stuff that would creep you out, what the stuff that's underneath the bed at night, right? And what would kind of creep, a kid at that age out would be something like that. Not to be, I think it's just kind of a reality thing until kids get a little more experience with things of that nature, right? It's gonna things like that creep them out at times, right? So,
Well, it goes back to the conversation we had when we read it. Little kids have tangible fears.
yeah, right, and and kids can be mean too, of course, too, right? But not that Rachel was mean to her or anything, but still she was creeped out about her, and she shouldn't have had to been put in that position, but it really that was really what drove Rachel to her fear of death, really, right, and her fear of talking about death. And but I think it really, and also really quickly, it also shows the different ways that folks deal with grief, right? We look at Irwin and Dory, right? Correct. I think that's Dory's his wife's name, I believe.
Parents,
how they deal with grief is different than the way our other characters do, right? And because by the end, Irwin's pretty much bawling and really hit hard, and Lewis is just Lewis is gone by then. Lewis is he's Dr. Frankenstein by then. So, but yeah, great stuff there, guys.
Any other thoughts before I jump into my book club questions?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. Question number 1. So glad you ended with Rachel and her conversation, because that feeds right into my question. I would say anybody who gets buried up in the pet cemetery is going to come back a little whacked. I'm not discounting that, but specifically it being Rachel, because she is so terrified of death and has such like a mortal fear of it. How does that impact zombie Rachel, if you will, coming back?
See, my only thought on that is she aware she's a zombie? Because it's one of those of because the only interaction we get really is from Timmy or Gage, who both came back pretty much demonic because they'd been in the ground for so long, been dead for so long.
Potentially, that was the reason.
Well, that's what we're here to. That's what we are to assume, kind of thing. But so if it did work with Rachel, would she even know that she was, buried and dead and everything like that? So that's where my brain kind of goes to it. Is it would fall into that. If she knew, Lewis is dead, because how dare you kill me, or I die and then you bring me up just so I can die again, But if she doesn't know, I don't know.
I think it's a good question of, how many people are out there that have been, medically considered dead and survived, and were brought back by the doctor on scene that gave him CPR, and like that happens. And it's just a gap, right? I don't remember, Harry Potter when he dies, I didn't really go anywhere. I'm just still here. So I don't know if it would be any different for her if she truly has, blood pumping again. If it's just, it depends on what the nature of the science behind the resurrection, right? Like, is it still like a blood pumping body, or is it truly, sludge in the veins, zombification, or ghoulification, if you want? And it just depends on how that works. But I think, to me, I feel like she seems pretty normal. We only get one word from her, right? The last line in the whole book, and it just says darling. And it can be taken very ominously, right? Comes up, puts her hand on his shoulder, and just says darling. Or it can be proof of concept that maybe it did work. That's technically how I read it. I think it does fall under, I think it's a much more successful resurrection, probably due to the timing of it. And also maybe the nature of how she was killed compared to being obliterated by a truck. Stab wounds are a little easier to overcome.
But also, somebody in the chat earlier had mentioned, what happens when you try to bring back a body that's been embalmed?
I was going
totally
to bring that up as well, because
that's what I love about the concept. As a reader, we're asking those questions too, and
so ambiguously, it's so well done.
He's doing what we are asking him to do. We were just like, it was because this, Timmy Baterman was 3 weeks, right? Gage was embalmed, right? But Rachel just died, right? I think she was stabbed, and I don't know how much she was eaten, but I think it was kind of inferred that Gage ate her a little bit.
I forgot about that.
Right? So, but I don't, because that's a eerie scene right there when he was like, when he's looking over at her body, right? So, but back to the first time I had read this book, I was so I was just crushed by the grief and just kind of in awe, if you will, right? But I still had this false hope that Rachel had come out all right, but I firmly believe, that's just my own opinion, that the ground is sour, right? The Wendigo possessed it, right? So anything that gets buried in there, it's him now, basically, right? And back to what kind of drives it home for me a little bit is like we have Rachel put her cold hand, I think it was like her cold hand, or they said the touch was cold, something to that nature. If you guys
I think
are
so.
the book there, I think there's something where there's an inference of cold.
Mm-hmm. A cold hand fell on Lewis's shoulder.
And then the gurgling sound from the dirt.
Her Rachel's voice was grating, full of dirt.
Grating.
Darling, it said.
Yeah, and then it said, right, and then yes, yeah. So grating, it said, and the cold, right? So when you put those kind of things together, I'm just like, I don't know if it's necessarily going to destroy Lewis, but what he owned definitely came back home to him.
And I think that's really my point of she's not perfect, right? She's not back to absolute normal. That's not at all what I meant. It was more of, I don't think she is a direct threat to killing him like Gage was. And like Timmy, they called him a monster, that a demon had come back. And that's where I feel like it's maybe a bit more on the church side, the Churchill, where it's, maybe a little more docile, maybe a little clumsier, but essentially not dangerous.
So my one question to the whole thing really quick with the Gage as well, that just bothers me because he's the doctor. He should know, just saying, morphine, if you're embalmed, you have no blood, you have no blood flow. Morphine shouldn't have killed him. Just saying. Like, it just, to me, that doesn't make like medical sense of he has no blood, he has no blood flow. That should not have killed him. Church, absolutely. Technically resurrected, with blood, that's fine. I don't know, just that one little bit, just kind of like, damn it. Of course, I gotta find one little thing to nitpick.
That's your Reb Rum of this book.
Yeah.
If we ever get
Reb Rum
King someday, well, I'm going to ask him that one. I'm going to write that one down. That's a good one. Because now, hey, if they were, when Timmy Baderman come back, did he have normal, was he back to A positive or whatever, right? I don't know.
Like, technically, yeah. Were they embalming back during World War I, for the soldiers coming back? Were they?
World War II.
No, he was. Oh, he was too? Okay.
Yeah, I think he died in 43, they said, like in Rome. He was on his way to take Rome.
I think I'm too naive. I think she's going to be weird. I think it's going to be like Ellie is going to hate it. And I think eventually Lewis and Ellie might leave her just because it'll be so uncomfortable. Like, imagine that's your wife and like that thing sleeping next to you every night. That's going to be a little twisted. But like the naive, hopeful side of me is like, but she's back and it's going to be livable.
Right.
I don't know.
It's a bit like the resurrection stone in Harry Potter, right? We always come back to Harry Potter, but you get a shade of what that person once was. It's not really them. It's close, and maybe you can lie to yourself, but it's not the same.
Yeah, and that's actually what he had said about church. Was it's church's body, but that's not church, and we can infer that Rachel would be at least the same as how church was.
I hope you folks are right and she's okay now and they can figure out how to get Gage back and Judd.
No,
I love Judd.
He can just be dead. Gage
Who,
can
Gage?
just be dead.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Ellie. What kind of supernatural element was there that allowed Ellie, off in Chicago, to know what was happening?
Ooh, that girl's got the shine.
Right?
Absolutely. That's how I see it, at least.
Yeah, and I was going back to. I really did think that Pascal. I know they really don't tell us 100%. More than likely, he might not be, but I just think he really did have some sort of connection to that. To the cemetery, things of that nature, right? And he was kind of the good spirit, sort of, to try to help us or to try to help our heroes. Was she not necessarily Danny Torrance? Maybe, it'd be kind of interesting to see if King ever did a sequel of this sometime, but see what happened to Ellie, but or maybe her and Danny hook up.
There you go.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't even think about the Danny Torrance reference to that, but I almost thought, I almost just thought it was, he's connected to that. He's a descendant of them, and so he was trying to warn their daughter somehow. But yeah, she might have the shine.
I don't see what else it could be other than maybe she had like a spark of the shine, or like, you know how little kids are kind of better at reading the room than adults just in general. Maybe it's that combined with like she's been in a charging zone, that the pet cemetery and the surrounding Native American lands are almost like an amplifier, and so her
Magical
skills.
waystone type idea.
Yeah.
And not
And-
that he's there right now, but she's been powered up and is tuned into her family at
To
least.
be completely fair, Rachel also likely has the shine.
Yeah, because she'd made some comments of Pascal coming to her as well, making similar comments and everything. I was going to say the same thing. And going back to a point Chrissy made in the chat earlier in the evening, it's funny that Rachel's the only one that noticed the sign to Salem's Lot on their way into town.
Mm-hmm.
She made a point saying, "Oh, that place sounds nice."
That sounds like a nice
Yeah.
place. Yeah. We also got reference to Cujo.
Don't go there.
There were about I don't know how many of you folks caught. I just off the top of my head, I remember they referenced Cujo in the beginning, I think, and I remember Jerusalem's Lot being mentioned. There was a few other ones I thought in there too. Maybe Fire.
I think Derry. This is the first time we
Derry was
had
mentioned.
Derry mentioned.
I think Derry was mentioned in Cujo too, right?
Oh, was it?
Starters. They don't know
Okay.
that one is.
I thought that was kind of neat. Also.
Yeah, that's like my favorite thing about King in general is that the deeper and deeper you go, the more and more references you find to other works. Okay, question 3. Who is at fault in this story, and who is the biggest victim?
Okay, I have the fault, and I can't remember his name now. The guy who showed Judd.
Stan.
Yeah, Stan. Because had he not shown Judd, none of this happens.
Yeah, but then
he
you
needed
could
to
blame
pat on.
Stan's dad, who's the one that showed him, and it just
True.
continues up the
Fine.
line. We blame history.
But I'm not going to blame anybody for their actions on this, because it is understandable through grief and through loss to want to try to do this. Is it the right thing to do? No, but is it understandable the want to try? Yeah. So
I feel like just about everyone here is a victim. I really do. I feel like the cemetery itself is the only thing I can look at as blame. Everything else, like I said, I look at a lot of this as being put on rails by the cemetery. Even the horrible things that Lewis does, I don't think he necessarily had I think he lost all free will when it came down to it. And whether or not that makes him innocent, I don't know. But it's hard for me to really say that he actively did those things. I don't know. It's tough. More ambiguous across the board.
I agree with you, folks. I think basically this is man versus the mystical, if you will, right? Or some supernatural thing, right? But now where the depths of that lie. I know that's opened up a lot of conversations where folks are thinking, oh, it was when the white settlers came in and were trying to push the natives out, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get the assumption of cannibalism possibly happening, right? And was it at that point that was that the issue that happened here, or was it just the Wendigo basically all along? Which is kind of what I think it is. I think that if I had to pick a main antagonist for this film or for this novel, excuse me, it'd be the Wendigo.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's it's kind of that's an interesting topic for sure. That's
How about
great.
the biggest victim?
And then then the biggest victim. Boy, yeah, I want to say Lewis, but really when you look at it, Ellie has lost everything. I think she was kind of our first introduction into the fear of death. And by the end of it, pretty much everybody that was around her, other than her the grand folks that we weren't really too hip to, she was kind of left with them. But I think the biggest victim would be Ellie, possibly, and Lewis, of course. But
I think you nailed it with that one. I think Ellie. I mean, and I think the one thing I could look at Lewis specifically doing wrong of his own choice has to do around church, right? It has to do with resurrecting church and not telling Ellie anything about it and keep withholding that information. I think that's probably his biggest thing that he's responsible for directly. But other things wouldn't play there. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think she loses her cat, right? Then she loses her brother. Then she loses her home that she's just getting comfortable in and getting to know kids at school. They just moved here. That's a hard time for a little kid at any age, right? Then moves in with her grandparents. Dad loses his mind. Mom's dead. That's
the neighbor grandpa figure is dead.
Right, absolutely.
And grandma.
Yep.
Yeah.
And she was pretty much there for all of that.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a pretty rough, and like you said, when she comes in just with this slight curiosity and or ignorance to death, she sure gets a couple heaps full of it pretty early in her life. Less than a year later from asking that first initial question. This is a pretty rude awakening to what that can truly entail for one person.
Her change when Church comes back from how her fear of the cat dying to her, it'd be okay if he died.
Yeah.
Right. Apathy.
One of a touching moment there. So
All right, I have one last question. Usually I pick my top 3 questions and eliminate the fourth in case we talk about it, but this is important. Does Lewis ever make it to Disney World?
Yes. With Rachel, because she's going to be a character in the Pirates of the Caribbean. Fits perfectly.
She's going to be an audio animatronic. All right.
No, because she's Walking Dead, like the Pirates of the Caribbean folks. The Pirates of the Caribbean are Walking Dead. So
yeah, I'm just saying she could work there just like the audio animatronics, since there's no real people in there. She just
she can work for Lucasfilm now.
Luke?
Oh, sure. Yeah, why not? Like I said, they're going to be doing just fine. They'll be all right.
See,
they can go to Disney
I think he and Ellie abandon Rachel and leave her to her poor zombie ways, and she's so confused, and then they go there.
You don't think they put her down?
But as they say, she'll follow. He said, "I'll just leave Gage," but the cat always comes back. Like
that's to the home. I don't know.
No, that's to him. He sowed it. He grew it. It's tied to him. So it will follow him across the nation.
He mentioned because there was a time when he was just going to leave. I think it was right when he realized when he saw the footprints, right? And there was he had a thought of just packing up and going, right? But he was like, nope, he'll find me down in Florida. It will come and get me. Right?
All right.
Just real. What happens there at the end? Yeah. Rachel comes back. She is fine, right? And she has now this mystical power and knowledge, right, to figure out how to get it to work for Gage and Judd as well. And they all come back and take a trip to Disney World. Oh heck, let's bring Norma back too. And that's my ending, folks.
It sounded like Norma was having fun on her own. Where she was at, according to Gage.
I don't believe that though. But.
That's the one time I think he was lying, because the Wendigo thing that with Timmy, I did have this point, but since we're kind of coming around it, I'm not going to be as graphic. But when with Timmy, he spoke all truths. I don't think Gage was. I think Gage was just trying to get to Judd.
It was that exorcist moment, right?
Yeah.
When, But I love how they puts that spin in there because we know that the Wendigo, or the Wendigo knows all, and it will tell you truths. Why does it have reason to lie, right? And so it does make you think, oh man, was he really telling the truth there and stuff like that? I don't think Norma was doing that.
I don't think so either.
But
okay,
powerful scene though.
Next section. These are a few of my favorite things. So, what was your favorite part of this book? What was the thing that stood out? And Dog, I'm going to start with you on this one.
I said earlier, like my favorite part of that book was where Lewis was in the garage, and it was kind of a metaphor of what was happening or what was about to happen, right? He was kind of lost in the dark, had no idea, starts banging around on stuff, starts thinking about the way life might have been, or something, or some other tangent he goes off on. Now this cat is curled around his leg and he's screaming for dear life. But so that was kind of like my favorite scene, just the creepiness of it, the foreshadowing of what was about to happen. And some of the powerful writing that like Ben had talked about earlier too, with when he was thinking about where what could the way it could have been with Gage, things of that nature. But if folks, if you ever do pick up this book, I really love the beginning of part 2. And the way he writes, the horror and how the human mind can take the horror and things of that nature, and it was just kind of telling us that from this point on, things are going to get bad, and they're going to get even worse, and they're going to get even worse and even worse, right? And just an amazing journey, just a hell of a ride.
Benji,
I don't want Church to die. He's not going to die. God can have his own cat. Church is mine. And reading or hearing the preamble written by King, and that was a direct line, according to him, from his 7-year-old daughter at the time. Worried about that. It's just that is such a cool line. It just I absolutely love it. It's like, yeah, God, God could do whatever the fuck he wants. This is my cat, and it's like, yeah. So that one stood out to me just from the get go, from the jump. Everything in this book is awesome, but
Right, Luke.
I just want to highlight something the dog said. I really love the writing in this book. This is not the first time it's made me feel this way in reading some of King's early books like this. There's a very much an Edgar Allan Poe type terror going on, especially the interior anguish that people deal with. I just want to highlight that is very, very evident in this book throughout, probably more so than any of the other ones even, but just really, really well done on that. But my favorite thing, and it's basically a character, but it stems from this line. "Oh, about beer, I never lie," Crandall said. "A man who lies about beer makes enemies." It's just one of those lines. When you're a beer guy, you hear that, that's going to be like on my gravestone before you guys resurrect me. So we'll probably make T-shirts about that. A man who lies about beer makes enemies. But
how can you not love Judd after that line?
Dude,
right?
I love Judd Crandall. He's great.
Luke, was that like right after, like when Lewis was kind of feeling trepid about heading over and meeting Judd and stuff like that?
It's like the first day that he goes over to follow up, because he offers him the beer when they first meet, and he's like, "Well, I come out about 9:00 every night. Don't think you need an invitation like this. You have an open invitation." And so he's like, "You know what? I'm pretty tired, but I'll go over and have a beer." And he checks in and Lewis checks in with Judd, and he's like, "Is that beer offer still on the table?" And Cradle's like, "Absolutely. I don't lie about beer."
Yeah, it's great. I love that character too.
He just reminds me of so many people in our family.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I think you said it right with like Uncle Jim or Uncle Tom. Yep,
Uncle Tom, Grandpa,
Grandpa Doc. Yep.
Yeah.
This is family.
What?
This is a family, man. This is someone that fits in with us for sure.
Yeah, it's just, that's because they're just that person, and that genuinely, they really mean it. They really want you there. They really, it's very familiar. Okay, my favorite part was the scene with the kite.
The only happy scene in the whole book.
Kindergarten was good.
The only extended optimistic scene.
But here's the thing that I liked the best about it. You say extended. It was absolutely dripping with, but it all's downhill from here. This is the last happy thing. Very few happy things, right? The book starts out unhappy. The book ends unhappy. Very few happy things happen in the middle. This is the one happy thing. So you better enjoy it, because there is no more happy after this point. It was very Lemony Snicket in that. And
yeah,
I was very excited. I was like, oh, this, and then it was, this is the last time he remembers being happy. And my heart just dropped. I'm like, can't you just give me the day? Just give me the day. Just let me be happy in like this moment. Don't ruin it anyway.
I will say, at least one thing King could have done is literally right after the kite scene, truck comes, wham. It would have just been that really hard sucker punch,
That's okay too. Then it would have been right. No, it's like when he looked back. I hate it too. It's like, look back from like 2 weeks from now. Look back when he was 70. What do you mean when he looked back on this time? What does that look like?
Right.
I love that also, because it's kind of a tearjerker a little bit too, because you hear Gate, "Oh, I'm flying kites, Dad," all that, and it's just like, and you're just totally picturing this, right? And then, because I love Melancholy too, and it's just so well done, because in there he's just like, this is going to be like, this son only has like 2 weeks to live or something like that. He, just like Melissa said, he literally is going to tell you that nothing is. I'm going to take all the happiness out of the world here, right? And it's going away, just like the Dementors are just going to come right in, and that's what's happening. And you're looking at this book and you're going, "Holy cow! There's a lot of book left, right?" And it's like there's a lot of grief to come.
I think this book hit me really hard because I'm a parent reading it this time. When I read it when I was younger, I wasn't. And so it was scary and it was sad, but this is like, that moment happens in every parent's life. not necessarily the 2 weeks from now my kid's getting hit by a truck, but this is the last time we're gonna whatever, and you don't know it's the last time. I don't know. You don't know when the last time your kid was going to ask. I mean, it's going to be dumb things, but like the last time your kid asked you to tie their shoe. When's the last time your kid crawls into your bed because they had a nightmare, right? So like it's little things like that as my kids are now getting older, because my youngest is 7 and my oldest turns 15 on Wednesday. Like as my kids are getting older, I'm hitting a lot more lasts than I am firsts, and that's the thing that's hard, because Lewis gets to look back. I don't know when my lasts are. And so I'm like, it was hitting me in the feels, but I don't cry. So that didn't happen.
Parenting, in a word, is bittersweet. Always.
Okay. Are you guys ready?
Yep.
Kind of.
Okay.
It's a tough one. This is a tougher one.
This is a very tough one.
This is the time where the three of us go through and we decide, based on all the books we have read on this show, where does this one fall? To give everybody an overview, currently it is still ranked number 1. The Shining is number 2. Cujo is 3. Salem's Lot is 4. And Carrie is 5. So what we're going to do now is hover over your box. You can pick any number 1 through 6. Don't hit enter yet. Where do you think this falls? Basically, like, what does it fall under? And then give it that number, right? So if you think it's number 5, then you're going to hit 5, and then it replaces Carrie, and Carrie moves down, or whatever you think. Are you ready? Are we in? Benji in? All right, go. Oh, I knew it.
Yeah. I almost went 2. Like it was
it was tough. It was tough.
Very tough.
So the rankings, Melissa gives it a 3. I gave it a 1. Ben gave it a 1. Yes. This becomes the number 1 book ranked.
No. Yes, average. Average is 2.
No. You have to look. We actually have a formula in there.
It has.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's in there. The way we agree. The way it has to work. If 2 people give it a 1, and the number it gets weighted up. It gets weighted to being better. Fair. So really, the way Carrie can be taken out is if all 3 of us give it last place, whatever the new book is. But I think it's harder to be considered better. So, yeah, I think this has way fewer problems in it than it did. I think it hits on every level that it tries to incredibly well, and it's just a tighter narrative to me.
Yes, it is more expansive, and it's a greater endeavor, but this one knows what story it's supposed to be, and it tells that story perfectly. And that's just kind of where I fall. Like, it was a very hard struggle. I mean, like I told Luke, I'm like, I really like this book. Like I told him this last week. I'm like, I don't know where I'm gonna fall though. And yeah, with this one, this is one I probably will go back and reread in like 15, 20 years. I'll probably reread this in 2 to 3 years because I enjoy this story. Melissa, your thoughts?
When I am asked, as I frequently am, what I consider to be the most frightening book I have ever written, the answer I give comes easily and with no hesitation: Pet Sematary. It may not be the one that scares readers the most, but the fear bone, like the funny bone, is located in different places and different people. All I know is that Pet Sematary is the one I put away in the drawer, thinking I had finally gone too far. This book is like that for me, and I probably won't read it again. And because of that, that's why I ranked it at a 3, because I will read it again, and I will read The Shining again. I don't think I'll read any of the other ones again, at least not for another 20-something years. So that's how I ranked it, because I won't be revisiting this book. It's not in my wheelhouse of like, man, this is one that I just have to keep coming back to. This is I'm going to put you in a shelf, in a box, with a lock, because you're scary, like real life scary.
Which is why it's
I
good.
think that's what. Yeah, I think that's why I was drawn to it more too, because this is the one that King allegedly says I put it away for 2 years or 3 years or however long. Like, I didn't want to do it, but I needed to publish something. So here's this. Don't really want to, but and for it to freak King out more than anything else, it's like, okay, like that makes it way better to me. It's like, yes, so.
I'm also a chicken, and I don't like horror, so there's that too.
This is one of the least horror of any of the books we've read so far.
Depends
hits
on how you
closer-
define it. It depends on how you define
This
it.
is thriller. This is psychological. This
None
is
of
not
these have been
horror.
scary. Let's be honest. Not a single scene in any of these have been scary in the least.
Okay,
Eh, yeah.
moving on. Final thoughts. I don't have one other than I'm good. This was scary and like psychologically, for my real life scary, and I don't like that. Anyway, let's go in reverse order of how we did favorite things. So I think Luke, you're next.
Final thought. Great book. I will definitely read this one again. I really, really liked the Poe style writing throughout. I grew up reading Edgar Allan Poe's short stories that Melissa left her paperback at my house when she moved out. So
I have it back now.
You have it back? Good, because I haven't seen it in a while. But it just, I like that style of writing. It speaks to me. It's the only thing, if you can get in someone's head and follow through the insanity that well, like that's good writing to me. That's one of the things that's hard to do. It can easily feel manufactured. I believed every bit of Lewis losing his mind because every single step he made was 1,000% rational for the wrong reasons, and I just loved it so much. It was really, really well done. Highly
Benji.
recommend.
So my final thought with this whole story, I'll paraphrase a good paramedic buddy of mine. He said, "Dying sucks, but death is only painful for the living," and this book emphasizes that. It's yeah, the dying, it hurts and everything, but Gage is good. Norma's good. Let them just be.
Dog.
Sometimes dead is better.
I mean, really, right? Just ask
Exactly.
Gabe.
So yeah, and this is I would put it. This is my my number one. Just standalone. I think I like the Talisman as a story. Overall, maybe I don't know. Boy, it's neck and neck with him, but he did a collab with Peter Straub on that. So just Stephen King by himself. This is my number one overall. I love it. So, again, I respect the folks that can't get through it. I understand if you can't, or even rereading it would definitely be tough, especially if you're a parent. I would just think it definitely would be so. But yeah, it's my number one Stephen King book.
I have a question for you.
Absolutely.
So when we first decided to do like a month by month thing, I just picked books that were short-ish. Sorry to those of you who are picking up some of the summer reading. They're a little longer, but I picked some of the shorter ones, but I couldn't do everything. But then I started going through sort of his early works and the stuff that I hadn't read yet. And the one that I read it 6 months ago, and this book is still stuck with me. Have you read The Long Walk?
I don't believe I have read that one.
It's one of his Richard Bachman books.
Okay. I think I have heard of that one, though.
Try it. I'm curious what like a hardcore Stephen King fan and somebody who like has had a long relationship with his books would feel about it, because there's not that supernatural element, but that continual progression of like you just have to do this. I would be interested in knowing what you think.
And the Gunslinger series, I'd read that as well, so that's fun.
All right. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure is all mine, folks. So yeah, great to be here. So thanks for having me. Yeah, it was great to talk with folks that love to talk about this kind of stuff. So I enjoyed it.
When we were planning for all of the shows, we're kind of trying to do maybe one guest every time. And Benji was like, "Dog wants Pet Sematary." he wants in. And so I've had people saying, "Hey, what about?" I'm like, "Okay, but that one's not available. We have a person." And
well, I hope I didn't.
You were wonderful. I'm so glad you were here for this.
No, thank you, Dog. Yeah. Do you have anything you want to plug, like anything on your channel going on or anything like that?
Not at the moment. Just kind of going day by day right now. So just like everybody else. But yeah, it was just great to be out and doing a live stream again, kind of like this, and getting to see the folks and stuff. I can see you folks in the chat too. And yeah, it's great to see you folks out here. I'll try to get out a little more and start doing some stuff. So, but yeah, thanks for having me, folks. It meant a lot.
Definitely.
All right. I think that wraps us up, boys.
Yep. So make sure you're following us on social media at Floats Down Here on Twitter and Instagram. Send us a digital red balloon, or with this one, a Wendigo charm at floatsdownhere@gmail.com. Look us up at thepodcastthat.com where you can find all of our shows. Subscribe and rate us on iTunes and YouTube at Drawbridge Media on YouTube there.
This show and all of our shows at thepodcastthat.com are produced with the love and support of our wonderful Imaginary Legion patrons. You should go there to patreon.com/stayimaginary to learn more about our awesome reward tiers. We want to give you things, and that would be cool.
So I believe the boys are going to do a movie watch probably this weekend. Stay tuned for updates and check for notifications on that. But that's typically what happens after that. I'm speaking for you, gentlemen.
This or the following. We'll see. We'll see which weekend. Just check
I
social
won't be
medias.
there. I don't do scary movies. But in June, first Monday of June, right? That's when we do these live streams. First Monday of June, our next book is Misery, where we meet the popular author Paul Sheldon and his super fan Annie Wilkes.
Gee Wilkers, you'll float too.
Stay imaginary.
Thanks.
The podcast that floats down here.
Hi, I'm Melissa, your Stephen King veteran.
Hi, I'm Ben, the Stephen King and horror film fanboy.
And hello, I'm Luke, your first-time Stephen King reader.